record audio on OBS's side because sometimes the audio is goofy, and I do see on black and white. One sec. Screen capture audio. Turn and Yeti. Excellent. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. If you guys could all, or JJ, testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Yeah, testing 1 2 3. Is that okay? Good. Paul,
Yep.
sound fine? Yes. Okay.
Michael.
If you'll be my bodyguard, I can be your long lost pal.
If you be my bodyguard, I can be your long
Whenever I have to
lost
test
pal.
audio, I pick a random song lyric. Usually
That's
Paul
pretty
Simon.
good.
There you go. Excellent. All right. Let me fix my camera here. This always does this. Settings, camera. And clean as a whistle.
Okay, good.
All right. JJ, why don't you kick this interview off with whatever questions or preface you have?
Okay. Well, today, very special episode of the JJ and Paul Power Hour. We have our first ever guest. It's Michael Tracey, someone who I really wanted to have on the show for reasons that will hopefully become apparent. So Michael Tracey is an independent reporter and columnist who's been published in a whole bunch of high-profile publications, including the Wall Street Journal and Vice and the Daily Beast. And he's been on, the TYT and Ben Shapiro and Breaking Points, and he's quite the big shot on Twitter and Substack. And I would say that Michael is known for having quite sort of sharply contrarian takes on prevailing political and media narratives about American government, justice, and foreign policy, which I thought would make him the perfect inaugural guest to have a chat with me and Paul. So thank you for coming on, Michael.
Well, I'm honored to be your inaugural guest. I didn't know that ahead of time, but
yes,
I'm deeply honored.
Well, it's going to be most of our conversations, me and JJ's conversations, are absolute shit shows. So now this is going to be extra shit show because there's a third person rolling in the mud too. So
I'll try to encourage maintaining some structure.
That's right. We need someone like that.
So Michael's been making a name for himself, offering some of the hottest, most contrarian takes on the Jeffrey Epstein affair. And
Can I pause you for just a second? I don't actually accept. I know people ascribe the term contrarian to me.
Yes.
I don't accept that because I think it commonly connotes some degree of arbitrariness, meaning I am just being quote unquote contrarian for its own sake because I want to provoke a reaction, or because I want to just arbitrarily take a position contrary to some other position. And that's not ever really been my guiding impetus for engaging with any political issue, whether it was the Ukraine war or Russiagate or the Israel-Gaza war or the 2020 riots or COVID-related issues. So that's not ever been my at least conscious motivation. It's just something that I'm ascribed with, and I have to reject it just because of the connotation of some kind of reflexive, arbitrary instinct that I don't think I have.
That's fair enough. I mean, as somebody that is often characterized as being a contrarian myself in the context of Canadian politics, I can relate to bristling at a term that I do think is often thrown around in a way that intends to sort of dismiss the kind of the seriousness and the motivation of what is actually inspiring the commentary that's being offered. But in any case, I will say what you have had to say on the Epstein thing does very much go against the prevailing narrative. And I want to quote specifically something that you wrote in a recent Substack, because I think this sort of articulates where you're coming from quite well. So in a recent Substack, you wrote, "The more I dig in, the more information I gather, the more I'm convinced that approximately 90% of what people think they know about the Epstein matter and then project outward into a fever-pitched political/cultural/legal narrative is either wildly exaggerated, wholly unsubstantiated, or straightforwardly fictitious." So I wanted to begin by asking you a very broad question, Michael, because I'm really curious how you would answer this. So who was Jeffrey Epstein?
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's the first time I think I've been asked that question in such broad strokes. I think generally, as a summarization of who he was a money manager. His money managing techniques were somewhat enigmatic, which is why there is such sustained intrigue around how he accumulated his wealth and how that continued, let's say, mystery around how he obtained certain aspects of his wealth feeds the broader speculation about the child sex trafficking ring component of all of this. And I should have said alleged child sex trafficking ring component of all this. I think he was somebody who attempted to insinuate himself into as many circles of power as he could, typically by offering luxurious amenities to powerful people, such as rides on a private jet, which is what he offered to Bill Clinton in 2002 when Clinton was going around discussing AIDS, is what the claim was in terms of his trip to Africa in relation to the Clinton Foundation shortly after Clinton left office as president. He also convened these soirees or salons where he would invite prominent people from a variety of different fields to go to one of his luxurious properties in New York or in Palm Beach or in the Virgin Islands or in New Mexico or in Paris. So that lends itself to a fair degree of intrigue. So I've always said that I completely understand why it is that people are endlessly fascinated by this issue and eager to speculate on what could be some of the most nefarious possible explanations for it. So I think that basically describes who he is. I'm not going to claim that in this little introductory answer I've encapsulated every aspect of his personality or his career or his activities. But I think that's probably basically what he was. He also was somebody who clearly had a certain worldview around the permissibility of, let's say, sexually liaising with women who may or may not be above the age of legal consent, at least at a certain time period. So I think this was most pronounced, most likely in the early 2000s from, let's say, 2002 to 2005 or thereabouts. Because, he articulated this to the New York Times. He articulated this in other fora where he thought it was an arbitrary social construct of modernity that men could not sexually interact with post-pubescent females who might be considered under the age of consent per contemporary law, but are biologically capable of bearing children. So that was part of his probably worldview, and also, at least for a time, and part of why he ended up enabling or facilitating the inflow of teenage girls to his Palm Beach house that led to the Palm Beach police investigation of him initially in 2005-ish. So I think that is a rough approximation of who he was, but obviously there are many other dimensions to this that we could get into.
Yes. Okay. So somebody who emerges as one of sort of the great villains of the Epstein story in your writing is Virginia Giuffre, who is, of course, one of the highest profile Epstein accusers, who committed suicide earlier this year. And she's been in the news a lot lately because of all this stuff with Trump and Mar-a-Lago and the idea that she was stolen away and all that. In your writing, you call her a proven serial fabulist and an admitted serial fabricator. And you say that sort of the grand idea of the Epstein conspiracy, the sort of one that's very mainstream in the culture right now, the idea of the elite pedophile sex trafficking scheme, is based, and this is a quote from you, is based almost exclusively on the fantastical claims of Virginia Giuffre. And so what do you mean by that?
Well, In December of 2014, her lawyers at the time, or two of her lawyers at the time, Bradley Edwards and Paul Cassell, filed what was called a motion for joinder on her behalf. So there was ongoing civil litigation around the alleged failure of the US federal government to properly notify persons whom the government designated as victims that there was a non-prosecution agreement that was being negotiated with Epstein in 2007, 2008. So the claim was that per a federal statute that was actually enacted only in 2004, the Crime Victims' Rights Act, so not that long before this episode, the federal government was obliged to notify this array of persons whom the government had identified as victims but hadn't been adjudicated as victims in any meaningful sense, that there was this pending plea agreement, effectively, or a non-prosecution agreement, whereby Epstein would be compelled by the federal prosecutors to plead guilty to 2 state-level charges in Florida. And we can get into some of the unusual civil liberties considerations around even that aspect of this case, because the idea was that before a defendant had even been convicted or pleaded guilty, that the government was obliged to inform this whole universe of purported victims that they were entitled to certain forms of input or relief, which I think is questionable from a civil liberties standpoint, because if you're not found guilty, if the government hasn't met its burden of proof to find you guilty of anything, then how can you be said to have definitively established quote unquote victims? I mean, forget Epstein. I think that would apply to almost anybody. But that was sort of like a legal movement to introduce that mandate on the part of the government that really gained steam in the early 2000s. So Virginia Giuffre, also known as Virginia Roberts or Virginia Roberts Giuffre, had her attorneys filed a motion for joinder on her behalf so she could join that lawsuit and claim that she was entitled to monetary damages related to the government failing to allegedly properly notify this collection of alleged victims. And in that motion for joinder, Giuffre basically introduced this whole theory that now dominates or animates what people perceive to be the crux of the Epstein issue, and it's what they claim is continuing to be covered up now, supposedly by Donald Trump, which is that there was this wide-scale child sex trafficking operation that entrapped prominent individuals, and which Epstein orchestrated and also obtained blackmail on those prominent individuals in furtherance of. So in that motion for joinder, if you go back and read it, she says that she was trafficked as a minor to 2 named individuals, Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz. And then she also, in a very bizarre and probably not particularly lawful legal maneuver, she just claims in broad strokes, or as a categorically, that she was also trafficked as a minor to unspecified foreign prime ministers and royalty and other prominent individuals who she doesn't name in that motion. The only 2 that she names specifically are Dershowitz and Prince Andrew. She also does name Ghislaine Maxwell as like an accessory to the trafficking operation. And even in that motion for joinder, she does allege the blackmail component. Now, she doesn't specify that the blackmail was conducted at the direction of any particular intelligence agency, or, she doesn't say the Mossad or the CIA or the MI6 or anything. She just says there's a blackmail component here. So as the years went by, as various elements of her claims were litigated, it became just indisputable, at least in my estimation, and I think in the estimation of anybody who rationally and dispassionately assesses this issue, that she was just a proven serial fabulist. People accuse me of overusing the term serial fabulist, but I use that term persist with a particular logic, which is because I can't say for sure that she was a willful, knowing liar. I don't know what was going on inside her brain. I'm not her psychotherapist. I could just evaluate what she put into the public record. And I think it's at least plausible that on some level, given her emotional state or given whatever else was going on with her psyche, that she did come to believe on some level that what she was saying had some truth component to it. But it's clear she was just a serial fabulist.
Yeah, which
and we
is
can
just-
get into into the evidence for that claim that I'm making.
Real quick,
about
can
it.
I ask you just a clarifying question? So do you so because Virginia Giuffre also claims that she was just sex trafficked and abused by Epstein himself. Do you think that's not true? You think it's all made up, or particularly, or just the part about the blackmail ring and other prominent individuals?
I think there's a decent amount of evidence that she actually was in Epstein's milieu for some period of time, probably between 2000 and 2002. So she initially tried to claim, if you go back and look at some of the early filings, that she was 15 when she first encountered Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein. Then that was later revised by her own attorneys, that she was at least 16 and probably 17 when any of the alleged sexual offenses occurred to her. And it is true that in Florida, the age of consent is 18. But in other jurisdictions where she might have even alleged some of this stuff took place, such as the United Kingdom or New York, the age of consent is lower. So it's not even clear that those offenses would, on their own terms, as overt acts, be illegal or criminal. Now, I'm not an age of consent guy normally. I'm not somebody who necessarily goes around steadfastly studying the intricacies of every age of consent statute, but it does happen to be a relevant factor here in terms of what illegality is being claimed. So, unfortunately, despite the implications that some might want to derive from it, it is something that has to be examined. So no, I don't doubt that she was in Epstein's milieu. I think it's at least plausible that she might have engaged in some sexual acts with Epstein, whether she was 17 or 18 or 19. Because essentially, I mean, she had claimed that she was essentially more or less a child prostitute from almost the time that she was a young child. It's kind of disturbing. She claimed initially that she was abused or molested by somebody that she hasn't named, who might have been in her family or something when she was, I might not get the exact age right, but it's like a young child. So it actually would have been something that was pedophilic. So 7, 8, 9, something like that. And she claims that she was on the beach in Miami, sitting on a bench, and in like this dramatic, almost cinematic moment, somebody pulled up in a limo and said, "Hey, Virginia, hop in the limo." And it turned out to be this sex trafficker named Eppinger, that's his last name. And then she claims that she was subsequently trafficked by another person even before she claims to have encountered Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein. So this is clearly like something that was going on with her lifestyle. So if she engaged in some kind of sexual encounter with Epstein, I would not be shocked at all. I just would have to insist that given her demonstrable, irrefutable pattern of serial fabulism, that nothing that she claims that happened to her can be believed just on its own terms. There would have to be additional corroboration or evidence to substantiate anything, for me anyway, to believe that anything that she claimed was true.
Well, there was wasn't there another woman who corroborated the claim that Prince Andrew molested?
No, not really. After the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, there was this one woman named Carolyn Adriano, who was also deeply mentally unwell. I'm not saying that to be disparaging. Like, it's just provable. It's proven. She admitted it. She said in the trial that she was a schizophrenic and that she was hearing voices telling her that her children were at risk of being abducted by traffickers. This was in the 2021 trial, and the jury was being asked to believe beyond a reasonable doubt her claims about events that occurred like 20 years or more before. And she claimed in a media interview after the trial that she received like some kind of photo and or text message from Virginia Giuffre, in which Giuffre reported that she had some encounter with Andrew, but I wouldn't call that any kind of meaningful corroboration at all. It wasn't tested at trial. Okay. So if that was such slam dunk corroboration, why would the government not have introduced that at trial to substantiate the allegations that Carolyn Adriano did make under oath to convict Maxwell? And ironically, to the extent that this person, Carolyn Adriano, was trafficked, she said that she was trafficked by Virginia Giuffre. She says that she encountered Epstein because she was recruited essentially by Virginia Giuffre when Giuffre may or may not have been an adult, which is ironic because her testimony was supposed to be marshaled to convict Ghislaine Maxwell of being a trafficker. So no, I wouldn't say that there's any real credible corroboration of that.
One other thing I want to just ask before I hand it over to Paul to ask some questions of his own. But there's something else, Michael, that sort of looms large in a lot of your writing, which was an aspect of the story that I was completely oblivious to before I started reading your writing on it, which is the idea that there was a lot of settlement money, like that there were these big settlements, including from JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank. And I think that's just an aspect of the Epstein saga that you don't see reported very often, but it looms large in a lot of your analysis because, well, I mean, maybe you can just kind of like explain this because, again, I think this is just something that people are just completely oblivious to. What settlement are we talking about? Why are banks involved? Like, what is this exactly?
People are oblivious to so many aspects of this story. It's amazing. And one thing that I find ironic is that to the extent that we can generalize and like identify something called the alternative media or like the podcast type media or streaming media versus the mainstream media, they're basically of one mind on this issue.
Yes.
Meaning that they exclude countervailing information from the predominant narrative that they pump out every day. I think the monetary incentives here are hugely consequential, and you don't hear them reported on adversarially, not even adversarially, but just like with a modicum of critical detachment at all.
So what was settled exactly? Because this relates to this, like, is the Acosta thing? Is that right?
Not really. Okay, so at least in terms of the giant monetary settlements that I'm talking about. So after Epstein's death in August 2019, there was lots of ongoing litigation where alleged victims would be suing his estate in the Virgin Islands. That's where it was legally housed. And what happened was the lawyers representing Epstein's estate, so like the executors of the estate effectively, agreed in conjunction with the lawyers who were primarily the ones representing the victims, who made an absolute bonanza, meaning the lawyers, on this whole episode, stretching back 15 years or so at this point, like David Boies, Bradley Edwards. The lawyers collaborated with one another to establish this mechanism for dispersing settlement funds from Epstein's estate to the people that had been litigating against it. And it was called the Epstein Victims Compensation Program. And it was administered by a court-approved mediator. And the court-approved terms or conditions or a protocol for the administration of this estate that's expressly removed any adversarial component. So there was no cross-examination. The purported victims could file for monetary damages confidentially, so there was no downside risk if, let's say, they dramatized or inflated their claims to get more money, and they could get up to $5 million. And all four...
Just by alleging things?
Just by alleging things with no cross-examination.
Why would the estate agree to something so one-sided?
Because there was a tsunami of litigation that they were being inundated with, and it cost them a lot of money to litigate. And so they found it to be within their interest as executors of the estate to, as best as they could, come up with one sort of holistic solution to resolving all these claims. It was modeled on like the 9/11 process where like purported, victims of 9/11, like a family member who died or something, would be suing like the property manager of the Twin Towers or what have you, and then that it all got consolidated into one centralized mediation process. So that was the motive, and because Epstein was dead at that point, it wasn't as though the representatives of his estate necessarily had like a living person to defend against false claims. So I think there was like a logic as to why they did this, but then it created this model of a non-adversarial and confidential adjudication process that was essentially replicated by other entities that purported Epstein victims chose to sue under the auspices of these same lawyers, more or less, David Boies and Edwards. And so they sued JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank. And the idea was that the JP Morgan, for example, was, they made some somewhat extreme claims about JP Morgan's alleged complicity in the alleged child sex trafficking operation orchestrated by Epstein. But what the judge ended up finding and allowing for a settlement fund to be created in relation to was that JP Morgan was essentially negligent in not performing adequate due diligence in about cash withdrawals that Epstein would intermittently make, because he was a client of JP Morgan. It was basically a similar situation with Deutsche Bank. And so obviously a lot of alleged victims come out the woodworks to get as much settlement money as they possibly can. I don't even begrudge some of these people who got settlement funds. Like if it were made available to me, that I could just maybe somewhat embellish my experiences from 10 or 15 years ago and get up to $5 million, I can't say with any certainty that I wouldn't do it. What I do begrudge is the relentless credulity of the media, broadly construed, alt media and mainstream, and of politicians, and not evincing the slightest bit of cognizance of how this could make for a distorted incentive. Because now what we have is this folklore that there are over 1,000 total victims. This is what is claimed in the FBI DOJ memo that was released on the weekend of the 4th of July last month. And if you go and read that memo, they very conspicuously do not specify who would be included in this category of over 1,000 victims. And why are they even giving that kind of a vague estimate? They supposedly have been investigating this for Epstein's been dead for 6 years. So if they want to like give some kind of estimated total of victims, like shouldn't they be a little bit more clear about that? But it's just become this like political talking point now that people don't even examine the underlying basis for. And what they don't know, and what's almost never reported, is that according to the terms of these settlement programs, of age adults were eligible for massive payouts. They did not have to be underage or children to be entitled to payouts. They could simply claim that they were given a quote false promise, meaning that there was some element of quote unquote fraud in relation to their encounters with Epstein and or Maxwell. And then they would be eligible for the settlement funds. So you have some people like, for example, this woman, Sarah Ransom, who is one of the highest profile Epstein quote unquote victims. And a lot of them are still not publicly named anywhere. Only a small percentage, relatively speaking, are named or have have voluntarily named themselves in some venue. But with Sarah Ransom, for instance, she said under deposition that she was 22 years old when she came to New York City. She generated her primary income by meeting with quote unquote gentlemen through some unidentified agency for quote unquote dinner. And she would get $1,500 for each quote unquote dinner. And then she said in a deposition, occasionally have consensual sex with some of these quote unquote gentlemen because she found them attractive. And then after that, she ended up getting involved with the Epstein organization, let's say. And she says that she went to the Virgin Islands, which I think is pretty well established that she did go to the Virgin Islands as an adult. And then years later, she also goes through mental turmoil. And she starts recasting everything that she underwent as quote unquote trafficking. And she ends up being one of the named plaintiffs for against the Virgin Islands estate, and gives rise to the creation of this initial Epstein victims compensation program. And so, is she a victim? I guess that's how the media characterizes her. But if what people are being led to believe is that there's this giant pedophilic sex trafficking ring that's being covered up, and one of the most prominent victims is actually, by her own telling, she was an adult age woman when she first encountered Epstein, who was engaging in transactional sex acts for money, then I think that's a totally misleading impression that's being conveyed. And, so who knows how many more of these alleged victims were adults of legal age when they had these alleged encounters and therefore received settlement funds. I mean, does the media cover that aspect at all? Not that I've seen.
No, indeed. So I don't know. I think Michael's analysis, his command of facts, seems pretty persuasive to me. I mean, what's your take on what you've been hearing?
That's because you're autistic, JJ, and I'm schizophrenic. All right, I like seeing the giant picture and not getting weeded down into the details.
Okay.
I don't like. Well, I guess there's a couple things. So, yeah, well, of course, you're obviously correct, Michael, in terms of a lot of the stuff is exaggerated, a lot of the myth around it. When Virginia Giuffre committed suicide, I remember seeing a bunch of people saying, oh my God, this is an example of, they came after her now too, right after these accusations come out. And someone like Ryan Dawson at the time specifically said, no, I knew Virginia. She was a troubled woman. This is not the result of that. JJ, can you mute yourself real quick? I think there's noise of some kind.
How do I do this?
A fan of some kind? Yeah, there you go. So there's a lot of nonsense that circles these things. That's true with any narrative. I guess the way I see it is the Epstein story is not even necessarily about a particular blackmail ring. That's the centerpiece of the story. Epstein is one piece of the broader picture, which is the idea that, the ruling class engages in immoral, degenerate behavior. At least a subfaction of the ruling class engages in immoral, degenerate behavior as sort of a binding mechanism. It's, basic ritual psychology. Like when people point out the Bohemian Grove stuff, like, oh my God, there's all these people, rich people in the woods doing these rituals and stuff. It's like, well, this is what fraternities do. It's a way to bind people together. And the more prestigious and powerful the group, the more high stakes the rituals. And so the idea that, like, for example, you bring a bunch of powerful people on an island where there is sex trafficking going on, whether or not they're participating in it, it's the fact of we're being immersed in this environment. We're all in the same general milieu. Maybe there's no footage of Bill Clinton having sex with an underage girl. There's probably footage of Bill Clinton having sex with an adult woman. I mean, all of the rooms being rigged up with cameras and stuff. It's not necessarily, okay, hey, we're going to catch you doing something illegal with children. It's a broader, the Epstein story is one of, this is the kind of behavior and depravity and degeneracy that a subfaction of the ruling class engages in as a way to bind with each other, and be sort of an in-group. What do you think of that?
Well, I just went through a lot of very specific detail in answering the questions I was asked about various aspects of this story, and you just glossed over the entirety of it. And you said that the real story is some broader thematic thing about the degeneracy of the ruling class. You even seem to concede that, according to somebody who I would imagine find to be credible, Ryan Dawson, that Virginia Giuffre was an extremely troubled woman, and that she was not suicided, because that wouldn't make any sense. And I agree that wouldn't make any sense, because if she was going to be suicided, why wouldn't she be suicided prior to her rattling off like a decade plus worth of outlandish allegations? Like, there was nothing further for even her to allege at that point when she died in April of 2025. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not even sure how to necessarily engage with that response because it's totally non-responsive to virtually anything that I've laid out here about the specific details of this case. I mean, we're not talking about
I'm not.
the broad, like the broad-based alleged degeneracy of ruling elites. We're talking about the Epstein case.
Okay, and my point is the reason that people are interested in the Epstein case is because it feeds into this broader.
I agree. That's
narrative.
why people are interested in it, and they're not interested in the specific details so much.
Well, yeah, at some point, Paul, like at some point the facts matter, Paul, right? Like if the Epstein affair is going to be a data point, no, this matters because like if the Epstein affair is going to be a data point in people's conclusions about the ruling elite that you just articulated, then doesn't it matter if the data point is true or bullshit?
Yeah, hold on, sorry. Okay, maybe I miscommunicated here. Michael, I'm not disputing anything that you've put forward so far.
Then why didn't you address any of it?
I'm not disputing. I just said I'm not disputing it. What do you want me to address?
So you don't dispute that Virginia Giuffre was a serial fabulist?
I wouldn't use those words.
The one who was the progenitor, the one who was the alleged Epstein victim, who was the progenitor of this entire theory around child sex trafficking. You don't dispute that she was a serial fabulist?
I don't dispute that what she said is not true. What you using the word serial fabulist? I mean, if she was abused as a child, I'm okay. Then I would put it maybe differently. She was a deeply troubled, mentally ill person
who told a lot of falsehoods.
Lies. Yeah, yeah, lie is probably too strong of a word. Yeah, that's okay. That's what I said. So I'm asking.
But that's the whole crux of the Epstein issue.
No, it's not. The crux of
I don't see how that can be waved away, and then we just pivot to a more generalized thematic discussion of elite depravity in which the Epstein issue is just like one ancillary component.
Okay, well, this is it's called. I'm trying to contextualize the issue in the broader. I mean, this like for the last 5-10 years, one of the growing movements of QAnon, the pedophilic elite, all the pedestal, all this different stuff. There's all these.
Wait,
this
so you're
mythos.
into now you're into QAnon? So you believe in like the fundamental tenets of QAnon?
No, I'm saying that the Epstein story is psychologically salient because it fits into this mythos that has been
that I agree with.
Yes. Okay, right. I guess. Okay, I was not expecting. I'm not accusing you of doing anything being wrong necessarily.
No, I'm not saying you're accusing me
about
of that.
specific
I'm just trying to drill down on what you're positing here. I agree that part of why the Epstein issue is so resonant, and so salient and so enduring in the intrigue that it engenders is because it does borrow thematically from these long-standing theories that people feverishly promote on the internet around pedophilic sex trafficking, such as QAnon.
Okay,
but I just don't. I mean,
of course,
I would be amazed if you would actually affirm any of the core factual tenets of
that there are elements in the ruling class who engage in pedophilic degenerate behavior.
Well, where's the proof, Paul? Like, this is the thing, right? It's like you can make these accusations. You can say I believe that X, Y, and Z, but at some point you actually have to be able to provide proof of these claims, because otherwise you're just believing in a sort of fairy tale, right? You're just.
I mean, do you believe that generally speaking, QAnon was on the mark?
I don't even. To be honest, I don't even know exactly what QAnon. I don't know who.
Yeah, nobody
they think Q is. So my point is I'm connecting this to the broader thing.
Yeah, okay, I get it, and that's why. I mean, I agree, and that's why it's in that you're right.
Do you think
this is why it's so resonant?
Okay, so do
people
you
believe a lot of mythology around?
Okay, I'll ask you.
Subject area.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So. Do you think that Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, do you think they knew that Epstein was engaging in this kind of behavior and continue to associate with
engaging in what behavior?
The molestation of children.
But let's be clear about molestation of children, right? I mean, I'm also not a guy who typically spends a lot of time nitpicking the definition of pedophilia because, it's not worth anyone's time. But molestation of children, I remember generally referring to prepubescent children who are being molested or groomed or preyed upon by adults. And that's not what we're talking about here. So why don't we just be a little bit clear about the terms just so people have some precision in their ability to follow what we're talking about.
Teenage girls.
Okay, teenage girls. Teenage girls. Fine.
Okay.
Was Bill Clinton aware of this? I don't think there's any reason to believe that Bill Clinton or Donald Trump or Prince Andrew were aware of this at all.
You don't think there's any reason to believe that?
Well, even if we want to stipulate that what Virginia Giuffre claims about Prince Andrew is true, which I would reject in terms of our ability to freely stipulate that. But let's just, for the sake of argument, stipulate that it's true, and she did actually have a sexual encounter with Prince Andrew. She would have been above the age of consent in the United Kingdom at the time that encounter took place. So is that child molestation? I mean, you might object to it on moral grounds. I object on moral grounds to Epstein even coming close to the line of having these engagements with teenage girls, whether they were technically above the age of consent or below it, because it's just a seedy way to operate. And it can only lead to a mess. But like in terms of underage child molestation, I just don't see any real evidence for that. The encounter with Prince Andrew occurred allegedly in 2001. Okay. The flights with Bill Clinton to Africa and so forth is alleged to have occurred in 2002. Epstein was only investigated and charged locally in Palm Beach by around 2005. Yep. So why would those people be aware of this? Like, what grounds would you have to suspect?
Did Bill Clinton cut off communication with Epstein post his?
I don't think there's any evidence that Bill Clinton had any further engagement with Epstein after the Palm Beach investigation. There's evidence that others did, like Ehud Barak or Noam Chomsky.
Well, that's of course.
Or
that's the other. Okay, hold on. But so Ghislaine Maxwell's in prison for trafficking minors, correct? Do you dispute that that happened?
See, now we're bouncing around to different. See, I'm happy to address what you just asked me, but I just want to note that we're now bouncing around to another line of inquiry because you didn't address my answer to your previous line of inquiry. But we can bounce around. That's fine.
Yes, I prefer to.
Yeah.
Do that.
So I know, of course, I don't dispute that. You can go and look at what that Maxwell was found guilty of. You can look at the actual statutes. Like, have you read the charging document? Have you read the judge's instructions to jurors as to what they were to convict her of?
No, I do very little research on these. I listen to people like you and then form my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a deficiency in the research that people do. Even the claimed Epstein researchers.
This is why we have brought you here.
Excellent, great. So yes, Maxwell was convicted of participating in a sex trafficking conspiracy that the government alleged, and all the witnesses, the 4 alleged victims who testified at the trial, alleged, consisted of a grand total of 2 people. Herself and Epstein.
And Jeffrey Epstein. Okay. So my question is, this is not a. I'm asking this for the sake of genuinely trying to understand how you conceptualize things. This is not a gotcha.
Okay.
Just as using your faculties of reason, what do you think is the probability that people like Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak, we know for sure knew because he associated with him post the 2005 investigations. Like, what is the probability that these people knew exactly the kind of person that Epstein was and what he was doing?
Well, let's be clear about what people who did associate with him after the 2007-8 non-prosecution agreement and entry of a guilty plea by Epstein, what they could have known. Because what was known is that he did plead guilty to a state-level 2 state-level prostitution charges. So one was procurement of prostitution. Another was a procurement of a minor for prostitution. And when Epstein entered that guilty plea in June of 2008, it was unclear, really, if you go look in at the transcript of that plea hearing. But it seems to be indicated by the Palm Beach prosecutor that there was only one conclusively identified victim that then gave rise to that procurement of a minor for prostitution charge. And that person almost certainly, again, it's not 100% clear, but almost certainly was a girl who at the time of the alleged sexual encounter with Epstein was 17 years old and almost 18 years old. If you go and look at her interview with Palm Beach investigators, which is available for anybody to go view on the Palm Beach County website now after a FOIA dump, she says that she had consensually engaged in sexual intercourse with Epstein literally a day before her 18th birthday. Now, is she 100% right about the chronology? I'm not sure. That's just what she says. And she testified effectively to this at the grand jury that was convened in Palm Beach County. So that's what Ehud Barak and others would have known if they were just going based on what was confirmed by Epstein's guilty plea. There was other civil litigation, a lot of which stemmed from Virginia Giuffre, the proven fabulist, or however you want to characterize what you agree with me as to her credibility. There was other civil litigation floating around, but in terms of what was confirmed by his entry of a guilty plea in Florida, that's what was confirmed. So are we to infer that because like Noam Chomsky, for example, had some communications with Epstein and went to like a soiree at his New York mansion that included Woody Allen and people, that therefore they had some like sinister knowledge that they were overlooking because they wanted to excuse child sex trafficking or something? No, I don't think that's a fair inference to draw at all.
What do you think is the probability that someone like Bill Clinton, who I think would be fair to say is quite a degenerate himself,
not with relation to children.
Sure, but degeneracy.
I mean, he had an affair with Monica Lewinsky, who was in her early to mid 20s.
Right. The president of the United States fucked how old was she at the time? 22-year-old intern with a cigar in the White House while president. Like that speaks of a certain type of character.
But it doesn't speak to pedophilia.
I'm not asking if Bill Clinton engaged in pedophilia. I'm asking what is the probability?
I'm trying to be clear.
Okay. What is the probability in your mind that people like Bill Clinton, who is associated with Epstein, rode on the plane 26 times, the Lolita Express? Like, you put all these things.
Hold on, Lolita Express. Let's just be clear about something.
Was the nickname?
You're aware that Jeffrey Epstein did not name his plane literally the Lolita Express?
Yes, that's why it's a nickname. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like Bill Clinton said, "All aboard the Lolita Express, everybody."
So you don't think Bill Clinton ever referred to it as Lolita Express, or there's?
I can't fathom that Bill Clinton ever referred to it as the Lolita Express. That was a tabloid nickname years later.
Wait, there's no evidence that it was referred to in internal communications at all, like between Epstein and anyone?
See, this is another myth.
Okay.
That was a nickname invented by a tabloid years after the fact.
I want to ask.
Hold on. Okay, hold on. I want to. This is good. Look, listen.
Yeah.
This is why we have brought you here, Michael. Okay, I am interested. I mean, interested in the
Bill
truth.
Clinton. Okay, there is evidence. There is evidence that Bill Clinton. First of all, people say it was like 32 trips or something. A bunch of those seem to be legs of the same trip, right? So you fly to South Africa, then you fly to whatever it was, Rwanda.
Sure.
So
I'm asking about that. Yeah.
And there was a woman named Shantae Davies who is confirmed to have been on that trip with Clinton and Kevin Spacey and Chris Tucker and Epstein, and is sometimes just generically referred to now as a victim. But she was, again, a woman in her 20s who was so-called recruited by Maxwell when she was an aspiring masseuse in her 20s. And there's a photo of her giving Bill Clinton, a back rub. And but Shantae Davies said that she never engaged in anything inappropriate at all with Clinton on that trip, and she was, an adult. So I just think that's worth clarifying for people.
Okay, but again, this is I'm asking, what is the? I mean, I'll ask for the third time. Just generally, what do you think, based on your faculties of reason, what is the probability that Bill Clinton was aware that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were doing things like the trafficking of children that Ghislaine was indicted for?
Well, I mean, I think there are huge evidentiary and legal problems with Maxwell's conviction in the first place. So I'm not willing to grant that whatever she was convicted of is like a dispositive representation of the actual truth, given like the political hysteria that gave rise to her indictment and conviction, and now incarceration for over 5 years for crimes that have no nexus with any kind of violence or even really any obvious coercion. However, in terms of the Palm Beach teenage girls, some of whom may have been under the age of consent, some of whom were over, and who recruited one another, in like the same rough age group to go to Epstein's Palm Beach mansion and give him a massage of varying degrees of sexualization in exchange for $200, because then they could go to the mall together afterwards. I mean, I'm not making any of this up. This is all in the record. I'm not even like characterizing anything to try to be pejorative at all. This is like in the record. Okay. All evidence that I've ever seen points to that being a private endeavor of Epstein, more or less, meaning there wouldn't be any other prominent individuals who would have been aware that he might have gotten a massage from some girl who might have been, just below or just above the age of consent in the Palm Beach situation. Or at least there's never been any evidence furnished to that effect. And we've been at this now for, depending on how you classify it, 10 years, 15 years. And so, like, wouldn't there be a shred of evidence somewhere that somebody was aware of that going on?
Do we have access to, like, Bill Clinton's private text messages to Epstein's, all of them?
I don't know that Bill Clinton ever engaged in private text messages to Epstein. That's not in the record that I'm aware of.
Sure. And,
if people want to depose Bill Clinton, I mean, Bill Clinton was just subpoenaed, okay, by the House Oversight Committee. I'm all in favor of everybody being deposed. Let's hear it.
Yeah.
Paul, hold on. My point. I don't know why that would exclude Donald Trump and and Pam Bondi and people.
Sure.
But Paul, you're citing lack of evidence as evidence at this point, right? Like, that is pure.
Okay, this is what I don't. This is
logic.
Yeah, hold on. This is what I don't understand from. It's like, I don't know anyone. I don't know. I don't know anyone who is claiming there is, or anyone reasonable, who claims that there is absolute surefire evidence. Like, here's a smoking gun that therefore Epstein was at the center of a blackmail ring. It's a preponderance of circumstantial evidence. It's a preponderance of all these interesting coincidences. You said it was enigmatic how Jeffrey Epstein acquired his wealth. It's like, that's one way to say it. Like, we have no idea where that comes from.
We have some idea. We don't have maybe a fully comprehensive idea, but we have some idea.
Okay, what is your explanation for where he got his wealth from?
So, I mean, I'm just going to note, and I'm not trying to be insulting or anything, but I'm just going to note that we're now pivoting once more away from the previous line of inquiry, and now you want to get back to how Epstein acquired his wealth, which is fine.
Yeah, because we're trying to. I don't understand this. This is like, we're trying to see that everything is connected. It's a total picture. We don't like follow
through any train of thought here to its culmination. You want to just hop to different inquiries.
There is no culmination. It's everything is connected to everything else, and so I'm trying to contextualize the broader picture. And okay. I'm not, and that's why I said we brought you on. I'm not trying to, like, say, I don't think I've accused you of lying about anything yet. So
no, I'm not saying you accused me of lying.
Right. So I've brought you
the argumentative sort of pattern here.
I think the argumentative pattern is coming from you. You bring up a point, and then I'm asking it to connect.
I mean, the pattern of argumentation.
Yeah, because I think this is. I mean, I think this is very reflective of how people sort of process the Epstein conspiracy. Right? Is that they grab little sort of discrete random things, and then they think that if you smush those all together, that somehow provides persuasive proof.
Correct. This is what Whitney Webb does.
Yes, that is called that.
This is exactly what Whitney Webb does. Who, if people haven't seen it, go to my website, Substack, mtracy.net, and I prove just beyond any reasonable doubt that she just makes stuff up. I mean, she goes on podcasts. She throws out these data points that seem plausible to the untrained eye or the uninformed viewer.
Okay, I don't know. I'm familiar with Whitney Webb by name, but I don't know any of her stuff.
I'm just giving her one example of what JJ was talking about.
Okay, that's fine.
The so-called prestigious Epstein researchers who engage in this.
Okay, but this is a basic. It's like it's sort of an epistemological question of, like, at what point is someone entitled to believe that something is true if there's no single piece of evidence proving it? It's like, is the answer never? Because when you create the Gestalt image, when you have many different individual coincidences, if you come up with a story that explains away all of them, fine. But then there's a single through line of this is who Epstein was and this is who his connections were. Okay, it ties it together more. So I guess my question, like, it's for example, I don't have any evidence for sure. I don't have any empirical evidence, a smoking gun piece of evidence that Bill Clinton knew that Jeffrey Epstein, was abusing children, or even that Donald Trump knew it. He said he likes them young. it's like, okay, that's one piece of evidence I can put it in, or one piece of circumstantial evidence that I can put into a broader picture here using common sense and deductive reasoning, and say, yeah, there's a high likelihood. I'm going to act as if it is the case that, yeah, Donald Trump probably did know what Epstein was doing, and probably is implicated in the Epstein files in some way, not through pedophilia, but certainly through embarrassment of, being recorded having sex with some 19-year-old or whatever. It's like, to say that, because I don't have any smoking evidence for that. Am I wrong, or is it foolish of me to even have that probability of belief?
I mean, I agree that this is an epistemological question. That's a good way of putting it, actually.
Yeah.
And I find it bizarre that you are operating within an epistemological framework, which leads you to conclude without any concrete evidence that, however you're now characterizing this theory, must be true. If you also concede that the central accuser, sorry to go back to this, but the central accuser who spawned these maximalist theories around child sex trafficking was a serial, if you want to call it fabulist, fabricator, liar, however you'd like to describe it. If you're conceding to that and that doesn't impact your construction of an epistemology around what is reasonable to believe about this issue, then I just question,
it does.
I guess, the reasonability of your epistemology.
Okay, well, I don't think you're listening, because I said I don't
listening.
think this is fundamentally about a blackmail ring per se. This is about
what is it fundamentally about?
Hold on, Mike Benz, for example, who's I don't know what
who
your
has
opinion
made
of
up
Mike
a bunch
Benz
of
is.
stuff too.
Right, he himself says this is not a story about blackmail. It's likely that Jeffrey Epstein was an access agent. That's what the broader story is here. That's what his connections are to Ehud Barak and all that. So the idea that it has to be around a blackmail ring and it's this formal thing where there's a client list and all that, and it's like that's not nothing is that black and white and cut and dry. And so I'm trying to just understand where there are gaps here. That's why I'm not asking you as a, well, where do you get his wealth? If you can't answer that, you're wrong. I'm genuinely curious as someone who is skeptical of a lot of this stuff. I'm trying to, better inform myself. So I'm not spreading misinformation like the Lolita Express was referred to. We have that there's any evidence that anyone referred to the Lolita Express other than the tabloids.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a tabloid invention, and now people just assume that that's what Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton referred to this private jet. That's what it is.
Yeah, so it is. Yes, it is good to know.
Do you think the United States would let? You think the United States Customs Authority would allow a plane called the Lolita Express to just freely land in Florida or whatever?
Would allow a lot of terrible.
Perhaps, but I mean, in any event, it's not what it was referred to.
Yeah. So
in terms of the wealth, I mean, look, I would love for there to be a forensic audit of how Epstein acquired every last penny of his wealth. And there are perhaps some gaps in terms of the public understanding of how he acquired all his wealth. It doesn't mean there's no information. We know, for instance, that he was the money manager for one of the wealthiest people in the United States, Leslie Wexner, who owned Victoria's Secret and The Limited and other like women's clothing enterprises and so forth. And according to Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz, who represented Epstein in the 2007-2008 plea negotiations that led to the non-prosecution agreement, Epstein told Dershowitz, and Dershowitz said he hadn't confirmed this to be unambiguously true in every respect, but what Epstein told Dershowitz was that Epstein received 1% of essentially, I would imagine, Wexner's annual revenues. And for somebody who's worth like $9 billion, just do the arithmetic in terms of what that can add up to. And then Epstein also did money management and like tax advice and so forth for other billionaires like Leon Black. And Leon Black had his relationship with Epstein audited by a accounting firm in 2021. It was submitted to the SEC. So you can't lie on that unless you want to get yourself in legal trouble with the SEC. And it reports essentially that Epstein was calculated to have saved Leon Black hundreds of I don't have the exact figure at the top of my head, but I think over $100 million in terms of tax avoidance. And that Epstein got a certain percentage of that. And by Leon Black's lights, it was worthwhile in terms of what he saved. Now, I think there were, and he engaged in like currency trading and so forth. He engaged in other business like enterprises. So there is stuff that is known about how he acquired his wealth. I'm not saying the totality of it is known. I'm not saying I wouldn't want more information about every dimension of his fortune, but to say that there's no information at all about how he acquired his wealth is just not true.
I didn't,
Well, let me
say that. I'm
talk
asking. Hold on,
now.
no. I want to, because specifically the Les Wexner signing over power of attorney to Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
What is your explanation for that? That seems utterly insane to me, and this is kind of a central element to it. So what is your hypothesis?
I don't have a full explanation. I would love for Wexner to be deposed. So, I'm not against disclosure. I'm not against additional information. I agree with people who want release of quote files or anything else. However, if you go and look at the early series of magazine profiles on Epstein, 2002 and 2003 in New York Magazine and Vanity Fair, they discuss this with Leslie Wexner connection. And some people do contemporaneously report that they find it mysterious. Others say that it's more explicable. But one thing that Epstein was apparently doing was providing very rarefied services to this rarefied group of very high net worth individuals, right? Because when he was at Bear Stearns, he ended up in a department essentially of Bear Stearns where he was mastering fairly presciently certain complex financial maneuvers for high net worth individuals. And then he created his own essentially boutique firm to service a small number of extremely high net worth individuals. And one of the services that he was thought to have been able to provide to, for example, Leslie Wexner, and why he would have been granted power of attorney, or at least one reason, it was, for example, if Leslie Wexner's daughter was being courted by a gentleman who was maybe suspected as just having wanted to get a piece of his daughter's inheritance, Jeffrey Epstein could be the guy to tell the daughter that she must get a prenuptial agreement before marrying this guy, and then that would spare Wexner from having to have such an uncomfortable conversation with his daughter. So there were services along those lines that were very specific and individualized that Epstein could have provided. Again, I want to hear all the information about the nature of the Wexner-Epstein relationship. I'm not denying that there's more that could be known, but I'm saying there is stuff that is known.
Okay, that's fair. It is the idea that Wexner would sign over power of attorney to avoid a uncomfortable.
So, what's the theory that Wexner signed over power of attorney?
I don't know.
Epstein, for the Mossad, for a sex blackmail operation.
I don't know. Well, we can get to the ties with Ehud Barak and all that later, I suppose. But JJ, do you want to jump in?
I want to pivot the conversation a little bit. If we're talking about this as a matter of politics, Michael, obviously this is now this sort of big sort of scandal looming problem for the White House. Let's say that if Trump called you up, Michael, and sort of says, look, Michael, I've got this big problem with the whole Epstein thing. What should I do? If you were giving the president damage control advice, what do you think he should be doing right now that he's not doing?
Yeah. Well, he hasn't called me yet, but if he were to call me, I guess this is what I would tell him. First of all, everybody knows that you had a long-standing social relationship with Epstein. He might have even had a business relationship with Epstein that we've not been fully apprised of. We know that you were in the same Palm Beach, Manhattan social circles. We know that you had a mutual interest, let's say, in younger models. Doesn't mean pedophilia, but younger women who were in the modeling industry, who were aspiring models. Donald Trump was a beauty pageant proprietor. Epstein was involved with Victoria's Secret by way of his relationship with Wexner. And so it's not that mysterious to understand how their paths could have crossed. And we have video and photos of them at parties and such together. We know there's evidence that Trump placed phone calls to Epstein's Palm Beach house at various points. So I would say just acknowledge the extent of your relationship with Epstein and deny that could in any way implicate you in child sex trafficking. I mean, it's ridiculous. But the problem is that Trump, even as dismissive as he has been of this whole story, I mean, my suspicion is that Trump kind of like secretly would agree with me about most of this, based on partially anyway his firsthand knowledge and experience with both Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And that's part of why he's saying stuff like the Epstein files are a hoax, or this is all bullshit. But then, given his imprecision of language and his like addled nature, he starts conflating that with, oh, that means every Epstein file was planted by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and John Brennan and James Comey or something, which doesn't even make any sense. Yeah. So I would just urge transparency as to the nature of his relationship with Epstein, so everybody can stop feverishly speculating. There's already plenty in the public record. If he did send a birthday card or birthday note or birthday joke thing to Epstein in 2003 or whenever it was to celebrate his 50th birthday, who cares? Like, what is that supposed to signify? Nothing. It signifies that they had a social relationship, which we know anyway. So that's what I would tell him. And especially if you want to tamp down the political controversy, because if you just like every so often are asked about Epstein and you say it's a hoax, or if you're asked about Virginia Giuffre, as he was on Air Force One recently, and say, oh, she was, quote, stolen from Mar-a-Lago, people who are like chronically and catastrophically underinformed about this will make the most salacious possible inferences. So I would tell him basically a variation of what I've advocated, which is maximum disclosure and transparency, because I think it's a cliche, but sunlight really is the best disinfectant. And as more and more disclosures have been made, the fundamental mythology that people peddle around this continues to unravel.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've always felt that a lot would be like if Trump was at all a sort of sane or normal politician, a lot could be gained if he just kind of had. Do you remember when Barack Obama had that speech about the Reverend Wright back when there was all this sort of allegation about their relationship and all that?
2008
like
campaign.
Yeah, if Trump, was a more normal politician, you could imagine him having a speech and sort of saying like, look, folks, this story has gotten way out of control. Here's the facts. Let me just lay it out on the line and so on and so forth. But
and he's ensuring that it continues to be a political controversy because he sent his deputy attorney general to go interview Ghislaine Maxwell in prison, and then after that, she gets transferred to a lower level security prison. And I think that it's totally defensible for Maxwell to be given some degree of clemency, whether in exchange for her public testimony or not, because of my issues with the evidence and legalities of her conviction. But that aside, to even take that step is going to ensure that this is a hugely dominant political controversy. So if that's going to be the case, then just do maximum transparency and disclosure. And I think that would be to Trump's benefit, but it would also be to the benefit of, for example, a Bill Clinton or Bill Gates or whomever else that people want to accuse of having been implicated in the child sex trafficking operation. And maybe Trump would like people to continue speculating that Bill Clinton was the real culprit here because he went to the island or something, which it's not even clear that Bill Clinton ever went to the island.
But Trump has explicitly sort of said these sorts of things, right? And like this is
he's saying, oh, it's Larry Summers and Bill Clinton who are the real wrongdoers here. So I mean, Trump is he's all over the place on this as usual. Yes.
And obviously, as we know, like a big part of sort of the MAGA brand is very invested in the maximalist sort of interpretation of the Epstein conspiracy theory, right? And it's actually just, as you know, Michael, it's like a relatively new phenomenon that there's people on the left that are sort of embracing it, because now it's sort of seen as something that can be used against Trump, whereas previously it was used primarily to beat down, Bill Clinton.
Well, it's both.
And Hillary
like when Epstein died in prison, it was a cross ideological reaction.
That's true,
because Trump was in power that time as well, and Bill Barr was the attorney general, and people said, "Oh, wasn't Bill Barr the headmaster when Jeffrey Epstein was first hired at the Dalton School?" And actually, the full sequence of chronology there is not particularly clear in terms of whether Bill Barr's father, Donald Barr, actually even did hire Epstein. But whatever it was, there was more of a left-wing component initially.
But it is interesting.
Because it harnessed the power of Me Too. Like 2018, Julie K. Brown published this Miami Herald series, and I have a whole thing that I wrote on Julie K. Brown, which is still mind-boggling. People can go read on my Substack. But she credits Me Too for having galvanized interest in the renewed interest in the Epstein case, and actually even catalyzed federal prosecutors to re-prosecute Epstein starting in 2018 and then culminating in his indictment and arrest in July of 2019. So it was a Me Too story in a lot of ways. And it was used to attack Trump. Because if you go look at the headline in Julie K. Brown's first article in her series in the Miami Herald in 2018, it's Trump's labor secretary, Alex Acosta, gave a sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein, etc. So it was like it was like a proxy for attacking Trump, essentially. So no, they actually did have a left liberal component, valence to it initially. I guess it became more thoroughgoingly right wing when Trump was out of power, because the speculation came to be that the Biden administration, was covering up, as Kash Patel put it, a list of pedophiles because it would implicate their friends and donors or whatever.
Well, I mean, I think
now
it
Trump's back in power, so it's more of a left-wing resonance or valence to it. But it goes back and forth depending on who's in power.
It does, although I would say that even in Trump's own, in Trump's first term, that's when QAnon arose, and this obviously fits very tightly into sort of QAnon theology. And I think that there's always, although I would say it's interesting in some degree, because something that you do hear from sort of like the left-wing sort of Epstein conspiracy theorists is they'll sort of concede that, like, fine, I'll throw Bill Clinton under the bus. I'm sure he was, whatever, right? Whereas, you don't have that on the right, because the right is still kind of has to deal with this weird contradiction where they can believe the maximalist interpretation of the Epstein conspiracy, but then also kind of have to process that, there's as much evidence, such as it is, implicating Trump as there is implicating anybody else. So they kind of then have to come up with a very convoluted reason why Trump is actually still a hero, even if the maximalist interpretation of the conspiracy is true. And that's when you get like all this weird QAnon stuff, like, well, Trump was on the inside and was infiltrating, and he was only, it's like that joke on The Simpsons, he was only there to get instructions on how to get away from there, right? So I don't know, like, the whole thing is just so preposterous.
And that's true. There are people on the left who will say, we don't care, we have no interest in protecting Bill Clinton, and it's true, they probably don't. I'm sure they opposed Hillary Clinton and supported Bernie Sanders or whatever in the Democratic primaries. So they don't have a vested interest in, like, clinging to the unsullied reputation of Bill Clinton at this point. Whereas people on the right more have to at least kind of concoct some rationalization where Trump is exempted from their worst theories around Epstein. And that's why in the past you had this narrative that was sort of contrived where Trump was actually supposed to be the hero in the situation because he kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago.
Yes.
In 2004 or
Trump
whatever
is Q, right? Isn't that who Q is?
I thought
Or is
Q was this guy Ezra Cohen or something. Doesn't matter.
I don't know. I have a few more questions.
But there was I think we should be clear that there was more of a left-wing valence to this when it first sort of arose. It's a Me Too style issue. True and On, this podcast, which I admit I haven't listened to, so maybe I shouldn't speak with too much depth about it, but they started as a podcast apparently to cover Epstein, and they're like a socialist type podcast.
Yeah, this is part of the Paul. Do you know True and On?
The dirtbag left.
This is part of sort of the Joshua Citarella cinematic universe. I think, is it Young Chomsky who's the True and On guy?
Oh, is that who it is? I listened to the Young
Chomsky. I don't think it's Young. It's this guy Brace, and there's a woman who's his co-host whose name is escaping. Liz.
Regardless, I do have a few more specific questions, and then JJ, I don't know if you have any other final.
In fairness to the people on the left who covered this, even if they got like a little bit over their skis in terms of the facts, I do think on the left, like the critique that would be made or like the interpretation of Epstein stuff would be at least a little bit more coherent in terms of like an analysis that maybe had like a little bit almost like of a Marxian inflection of power structures.
Yeah, rich people getting away with all this bullshit.
Whereas on the right, it's kind of more feverishly invested in like demonic Democrats whose cover up of pedophile rings is what fundamentally explains how power is organized in society or something. So there are like differences in the left and right wing interpretation, maybe, but they kind of still fundamentally converge on the same endpoint.
Okay, I have and again, I'm asking you these not as gotchas. You can't explain them, therefore you're wrong. It's a genuine, based on your research. What what is your hypothesis for this? But the attorney, the attorney general of the U.S. Virgin Islands, who launched the lawsuit against, was it J.P. Morgan, and then was fired and replaced, and now I believe the current U.S. Virgin Islands attorney general was the defense attorney for the Epstein estate that the original attorney general launched a lawsuit against. What is your explanation?
I'm not
that?
sure if that's 100% right. I'll have to double check the facts. This is so. When I'm not clear on the facts, I'll just say so, and I'm not going to speculate. So I would have to go check that. I admit.
Okay, because I watched your debate with Sagar and Jetty, and when he brought that up, that was the most like.
Well, I don't think he
one.
Did he bring that up? I don't remember him bringing that up, at least in the form of a question to me. I don't remember addressing.
No, he didn't. That's why. No, he brought it up, and then I think he just kind of gish-galloped and gave 5 other points. So that's why I was curious to hear if you.
Which is what often happens here. Like we can't stay focused on one discrete point. So I think I generally know what I think you're alluding to, but I don't. I'll after this stream, I'll go look more into it with more specificity.
Okay. The Epstein getting the Saudi.
It is clear, and it is clear that Epstein, did like quote unquote philanthropic giving to a lot of civil society institutions, including in the Virgin Islands, so as to potentially get more permissive treatment or lenient treatment, especially when it came to pass that he had to register as a sex offender. And each individual jurisdiction has different requirements in terms of the sex offender registration or registry. So, I mean, my recollection is that he gave money to different civil society groups in the Virgin Islands, and then that was sort of cited as by his lawyers in the course of their communications with Virgin Islands officials, having to do with his conditions for the sex offender registry. So I've never denied that Epstein used his enormous wealth and hired very prominent, influential attorneys to represent him that pulled out all the stops or conjured whatever rationale they could or tactic they could to try to get him the most beneficial possible treatment over the course of his legal snafus.
That's fair. The Epstein having multiple fake passports, including the Saudi Arabian passport. Do you have any?
Well, how many fake passports did he have?
I don't. I know he had the Saudi Arabian one. We know that. I believe it was reported there were more than a few, but I could be wrong.
This was litigated when he was arrested in July of 2019, or it was referenced in the pretrial motions once he was in the federal jail facility in Manhattan. And I think, again, I would have to go double check, but I think there was one sort of irregular passport that was recovered, and the rationale was that he in traveling to Saudi Arabia in the 80s or something, he had, I believe, don't quote me on this exactly, I think it was an Austrian passport, and it was the idea was that if he couldn't do business dealings in Saudi Arabia as a Jew, or he was advised that if it was known to the Saudi customs officials that he was Jewish, he might have problems entering. And so he had sort of like a mocked up Austrian passport that was expired. And I believe that's what the explanation was. If there were additional passports, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I think that's basically what the explanation was that was given, at least by his defense attorneys. But if there's additional information on that, I'm happy to look at it.
That's fair. Okay. And then I have one last general question, and then JJ, you can take it somewhere. And then maybe we can do a bonus little 10-minute shift to a different topic.
Sure.
This goes back to, because this is my interest in this is it's the epistemological question. It's what How much evidence do we need? Do you think O.J. Simpson is innocent? Out of just curiosity.
Do I think he's innocent?
Do you think O.J. Simpson?
So
was
again, this
wrongly let
might be
go?
seen as contrarian. I actually am one of the people who think that the jury's verdict of not guilty was the correct verdict. In the
All right,
trial.
fair enough.
Doesn't mean that he's totally innocent.
Well, yeah,
but
innocent of murder.
It means
I
the
mean.
government failed to meet its burden of proof.
Fair enough.
With
Okay.
tainted evidence and other things.
But okay. So yes. So fair enough. That analysis of the trial. But if you had a gun to your head and it was just yes or no, did he do it? What do you lean towards? This is I don't know any. I don't. I'm not old enough to have been around for the OJ trial.
I would
so
say
don't know
pull
much
the
about
trigger.
it.
I mean, I think we had a trial. I think we had a trial, and
Okay.
the government tainted it. The government, like by its own admission, furnished tainted evidence. So, like, why would that need to be the case? I mean, look. I mean, I'm not going to begrudge people if they think like it's probably more likely than not that Simpson did commit the murders, and he was found liable in a civil trial for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman.
Okay.
But the threshold for a criminal conviction is much higher.
Yeah, but I guess that's what I'm at. This is because, yes, I agree. For a criminal conviction and for a legal conviction, it's different from a can we just talk about the issue broadly and assign probabilities. It's sort of like, the way I see it is if someone has a MAGA hat on and a shirt that says "lock her up." Technically, you cannot make any for sure. That's not hard evidence of anything, but you can make inferences and assumptions about maybe that person's character and what they believe.
Well, you
right?
you can infer that they support Trump, right? If they're wearing a
Yeah,
Trump hat.
but maybe they're a comedian.
Maybe they're doing it as a
don't
joke
believe
or
it.
something.
Yeah, exactly. So my point is, of course, like technically, you can't. That's not hard evidence of anything.
You could ask them, "Do you support Trump?"
True, but even then, they could just be ironically lying to you and poisoned and all that. So it's a question of like, when does it make sense to say let's proceed forward as if this is true, even though we don't have hard evidence otherwise?
Mm-hmm.
And so this
I don't think we've reached that point at all with Epstein. I think
fair enough.
it's the exact opposite. Because it's not just that there's no evidence that would substantiate these grandiose theories people have. It's that there's increasingly a deluge of countervailing evidence.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Then I'm gonna throw bone to the QAnon folks right here and ask you this.
Okay.
You're familiar with
Who are the QAnon folks exactly?
Paul's
I don't know,
face.
QAnon? yeah. Apparently, actually, no, it's all Destiny fans.
Actually, you know what?
FD
Virginia
Signifier
Giuffre got involved in QAnon stuff. Did I mention that before? I forgot.
I don't doubt it.
So.
I don't
Oh,
doubt
that
it.
is interesting.
In 2020, she started tweeting like
This is-
QAnon hashtags and whatnot. So that
wow.
should give you a little bit of insight into her stability or credibility
Yes.
as a
All right,
supposed witness.
This is tangential, so this is not directly related to the Epstein stuff. This is the broader. I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
Like my point about the MAGA hat. If if someone has a MAGA hat, you can make inferences about their character or whatever. Do you think that the Podesta paintings allow us to make any inference on who the kind of people the Podestas are?
I've never seen any hard. No, I mean, I've never seen solid evidence that shows that the Podestas were involved in a child enslavement, sexual enslavement operation. No, isn't that the inference we're supposed to draw from the?
No. The inference
what other
of the
inference
kind of
are we to draw? Like, what inference do you
that
draw?
they are degenerate and depraved?
Sexually?
Yeah, morally, sexually.
But like, you got to distinguch morally.
Well, let's go
sexually.
Morally. That's more broadly. I mean, I guess sexually depraved it can be.
I object to the political ethics of the Podestas. I've been a long time critic of the Podestas from that standpoint. But like, if you're conflating political depravity with sexual depravity, the latter is where I would have to just interject and say, I don't see any credible evidence to suggest that they're sexually depraved from the people that want to, in the way people want to believe when they view some painting of theirs.
Yeah, but
I mean, don't you need a little bit more than that to accuse somebody of
I'm not
child sex predation?
Okay, hold on.
Then they like maybe I had some painting.
Okay, I'm not. I just said this is. I'm not making a legal conviction. I'm not saying it. I'm
Well,
asking.
you, like, what
is it reasonable to make inferences about their character
but like what
based on
inferences?
those paintings?
What inferences?
The kind of person who has a painting of children at the bottom of a pool with their ankles slit or their hands bound,
I don't know. I mean,
On
I'm
their
not sure.
in their
I can't
house.
recall what painting you're talking about exactly, or whether it
Okay.
was established to be
Fine. All right,
in
fair
the
enough.
possession of Podesta. Like, did John Podesta have that painting? Is that what you're saying?
Tony Podesta is the art collector. John Podesta
So
had
Tony
the paintings,
Podesta possessed that painting, is what you're saying?
yeah, in his house and all that. Yes.
Okay,
He
I don't
was
know
an
that
art
to be true.
collector.
I would have to go and double check
Okay.
it.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough.
I mean,
Fair
I
enough.
think people throughout over the course of millennia have had a lot of out there artwork or forms of art that they collect, right?
Very different from. I guess. I do you know the paintings I'm referring to? Have you seen the ones I'm talking about? The children bound at the bottom of the pool.
No, it's been a while. I don't know exactly
Okay.
what you're talking about or who was
All right.
claimed to be in possession of it.
That's fair. That's fair.
I thought the guy who ran the pizza shop was supposed to be supposed to have had some.
You want to hear something crazy? I've been to. I was as a minor. I was in Comet's Pizza.
Were you
Oh.
sexually preyed upon?
No, but you know what? In all of the articles that said Comet Pizza did not have a basement, guess what? When I was in there, you walk in the pizza shop, and in the back right corner, there's a step down into like a gymnasium in the back, which any normal person would say that's a basement. Although technically you could say there's no basement.
How do you have
And
such
so
a
my
vivid
skepticism
recollection of like?
because we went there for it was like a political debate trip to Washington D.C. and we went to
How
Comet
old
Pizza.
were
We
you
played
at the
ping
time?
pong. I was in high school, so like 15, 16, somewhere.
Okay.
around there. So
all right,
they
fine.
said it didn't
I
have a
mean, maybe it
basement.
did- I don't
They
know.
said it didn't have a basement, but I was playing ping pong in the gymnasium in the back,
Okay.
and I can call up my friend and confirm it.
So
that
you were there when I guess we would expect there have to been a child sex slave ring, and you didn't observe anything along those lines, I guess.
Or I did, and I'm just very paid well by all the
okay.
right figures. Qatar, although I guess Qatar would want to have it be paid the other way.
I'm not sure why Qatar would be paying to cover up a child sex slave ring, and
Well, Qatar
Comet
runs our
Pizza.
government, Michael. I don't know if you know this, but Qatari foreign influence.
well,
Michael,
Campbell certainly got a
deeply
lot of money
concerning.
from her to represent supposed trafficking. Of,
That's what I'm saying. You need to
advocacy.
worry. This is the Qatar foreign affairs.
Actually, you know what? I'm jotting that down because I forgot about that. I'm just, I'm working on something about trafficking, which should really salvage my reputation on this stuff.
All right, JJ, do you want to ask something?
Well, I was just gonna say-
and then I want to do one 10-minute segment at the very end.
You want to
That's
do
something.
you want to do a lightning round? I just don't like Paul or Michael. What does it say about American politics that this is the kind of stuff that we're spending so much time talking about? That this is the kind of stuff that people are so obsessed with? You know that an easy way to make a successful podcast or to go viral or to have a successful interview is to talk about this Epstein thing. Like, you spend a lot of time dealing with this stuff. Does it make you just kind of depressed about the state of American politics?
I can't say I've been depressed lately. In a weird, maybe perverse way, I've kind of been invigorated because
Oh,
there's
yeah?
just such an underexamined wealth of material that people just don't.
But are people hungry for it? I mean,
Learn.
that's what I'm curious. Or are you seen as like a
I mean, I've
villain? Like, are
noticed
you
that
seen
I've
as an
gotten
apologist?
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, I've been accused
yeah.
of everything. I mean, the reason why nobody wants to engage with this stuff from any like legitimately critical perspective because you get just slimed with every defamation, like the worst possible defamations that you are defending pedophiles, that you're defending rapists, that you secretly are sexually depraved yourself. So most people don't want to deal with that. They don't want to be inundated with those kinds of accusations day after day on the internet. I just happen to be wired a little differently where it doesn't bother me that much because I know I'm just like grounded in the facts and the journalistic impulse, just as I would have covered many other issues in the past that I felt were being improperly represented in the popular narrative. But yeah, I mean,
That
you're
must
right. The
depress you about the
podcast
state of the
circuit,
country.
the podcast. I mean, I think everybody who's watched this and you guys can agree that I've tried to remain as rigorously tethered to the facts as I can over the course of this discussion. But that's not how most of the podcast circuit operates. People will just say stuff. They don't even do basic fact checking. I mean, journalism. I'm not saying I'm like the shining example that all journalists everywhere need to aspire to, but like I did start out as like a fact checker at a magazine, and like you end up getting inculcated in with the necessity of adhering to the facts if you're engaging in journalism. And like I just wrote something I published on the Substack or my website a few days ago. There was this guy Nick Bryant. I don't know. He's about in a hot commodity on the podcast circuit lately. He was on Breaking Points. He just made up a false study that I got Emily Jashinsky to the next day make a partial correction for, because this guy is just a fraud. I'm sorry, I don't use that term lightly, but he's just a fraud masquerading as a so-called investigative journalist, and he just makes stuff up almost every other sentence. It's actually astonishing. And he was on this podcast with Chris Hedges that, last I checked, as of like Tuesday, had over 1.7 million views. That was published in July. And, you know, almost every other sentence, he just blurts out something that's totally false. I'm not talking about differences of opinion, different, differing subjective assessments of various facts. I'm talking about just the actual fact claim. He makes up fact after fact after fact. And I could give you examples, but like you can just go to the Substack and it's indisputable. And they've just ignored it. Even though I've been on podcasts that are run by like the same organization, Sheer Post, that hosted that's affiliated with the Chris Hedges report. It's called, even though they've, the producer of the Chris Hedges report has invited me on podcasts in the past that I've, happily gone on. They've just decided that their best course of action is to simply ignore my inquiries, even though like their video that has over 1.7 million views is just a tornado of like provable falsity. It's amazing. So like nobody adheres, and especially in this podcast circuit, nobody feels they have any obligation to adhere to any factual standards at all, like journalistic standards. Journalists are flawed. I have many critiques of journalists that I've leveled over the years, but like, if you conceive of yourself as any kind of like journalist, you have to like have some weddedness to the actual facts. And like, that's just not a standard that applies in this circuit. It's amazing.
Well, it doesn't apply in part because the public doesn't demand it, right? Like these things are so popular, they go viral. I mean, like for me, like a real low point as well was like when you saw, I'm sure you saw it, when Tucker Carlson is speaking at the CPAC or whatever, the conservative conference.
Turning Points.
Turning Points. That's right. And, he speaks in his, smug Tucker Carlson way and, puffed his chest and said, well, it's so obvious that, obvious intelligence agent, big applause because that's what people want, right? That's what there is a market demand for. There's a huge market demand.
Well, and it's true, but
there's a huge market demand for conspiratorial sort of dread.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And that to me is like deeply depressing and deeply discouraging. And particularly when I think of young people, young people like Paul, who is, quite a bit younger than both of us, Michael, I suspect.
I'm 19.
Are you?
No. But it's like that these people are so credulous.
How old are you? Just curious.
28.
Okay.
And that they have such an appetite.
Much younger than me.
They have young people today, people in their 20s, have such an appetite for this kind of stuff. And they think that consuming this kind of stuff is how you stay informed and literate in American politics and American current affairs, right? It's not actually reading substantially well-reported content of any sort. It's listening to podcasts that make wild, unsubstantiated conspiratorial allegations about the ruling class or whatever. And that to me is just really upsetting. And that's why I very much value what you're doing, Michael. The only problem is that I worry that, the people that need it most are not going to be consuming.
Yeah, people ask me why. I was even at an event on Tuesday night, and I got people one after the next were coming up to me, peppering me with questions about Epstein. It's all anybody wanted to talk about, which is fine. As you can tell from this discussion, I'm happy to talk about it. And but one question people ask me is like, why do you even bother with Epstein? Like, shouldn't you be talking about something else that's more important? And so here's why I talk about it. Number one, I really despise the collapse of journalistic standards in association with this issue. I hate unchecked moral panics and mass hysteria. I really hate that. And I've hated that in other contexts over the course of the years. I really hate the abridgment of civil liberties, which I think unchecked mass hysteria gives rise to and plainly has with respect to various dimensions of this Epstein story. Just to give you a quick example, the judge in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial allowed the alleged victims, several of the alleged victims, to testify at that trial using fake names, even though they had already gone public, some of them, under their real name, to make allegations against Epstein and or Maxwell, and gave like TV interviews, did press conferences. But the judge in that trial decided to basically just hold the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution in abeyance and allow them to testify under fake names. That's just one example of a civil liberties abridgment associated with this story. And so those are some reasons why yes, I'm motivated to cover this. It's not because I have a secret affinity for like actual bona fide pedophiles. For anybody who's still wondering, I agree that actual pedophilic predation of actual children is bad, okay? And if there's any inkling that that's actually going on, it should be stopped. I don't think anybody who's sane actually disagrees with that. What I disagree with is how that like basic impulse that every just normal person has gets exploited to feed these feverish, wildly unsubstantiated theories that then dominate U.S. politics. And I guess if you guys are in Canada, like global politics to some degree, and lead to the misdiagnosis of political problems. That's another reason why I'm invested in this. I hate the widespread misdiagnosis of political problems. I agree that there are problems with regard to the U.S. relationship with Israel. I'm not somebody who's making any of these points because I want to shield Israel from critique or U.S. foreign policy from critique. Actually, you know what I want? A rational critique of the U.S. foreign policy relationship with Israel. And I feel like people on the internet getting so whipped up with this nonsense actually diminishes the prevalence of a rational critique of the U.S. relationship with Israel. Well, where I think I might quibble a little bit is I'm not sure how unique this tendency is among younger people. I just turned 37. I don't know how old you are, but like I don't get the impression that people who are Paul's age are like any meaningfully different than people who are my age or 10 years older or 20 years older. You know, I think this is a long-standing sort of dynamic in U.S. politics and political engagement. Maybe it's getting more widespread now with like the proliferation of these podcasts and stuff where there's no journalistic standards or even factual standards whatsoever, and they get massively popular. I mean, that could be true, but like, you know, the Oliver Stone JFK movie is just like this blinkered hallucination, which is a good movie. I mean, it's good just as a dramatization and as a basically a work of fiction. But that movie caused a huge groundswell around JFK files, and we shouldn't get derailed into the JFK stuff. But like, this is all just to say that this is like not necessarily a totally new phenomenon. There may be new features associated with it now, given this like ascendant podcasts class, where they don't feel like they're bound to any factual standards at all. But I don't think it's new fundamentally.
That's fair.
Yeah, the boomers get ravaged by Facebook memes probably more so than anyone because they have no immune system.
Yeah.
Anyway, but you've been very generous with your time, Michael. But Paul, if you wanted to do some
yeah, if you don't mind, Michael, if you got 5
you want to do a rapid
minutes.
fire, yeah.
No, well,
rapid fire.
No.
Try to do it rapid fire, Paul.
Well, we can. I just have a 5 to 10 minute segment here because this relates exactly to what we're talking about: the rise of conspiratorial thinking, which is a real problem. Now, I believe a good chunk of this was brought on by the absolute disgrace and disaster known as Russiagate. In this idea that Donald Trump was in collusion with Russia. Now, I don't know if you know this, Michael, but JJ is perhaps one of the most premier Russiagate hoax pushers who continues to allege that. Oh, no? That's not? You walked it all back?
Whenever we ever even talked about Russia?
Michael, could you maybe just a quick summary, what was the Russiagate allegation, and where does it stand now? What is how much evidence is there behind the idea that Trump colluded with Russia?
Well, I was a very early skeptical chronicler. I was one of the very few people who had even any media adjacency who was critically covering the Russiagate narrative from the very beginning. So July of 2016 is sort of where I source it as originating. And I, used very much the same journalistic sort of approach that I do now with Epstein. And yeah, I think that the Russiagate or Trump-Russia collusion narrative was very actually similar to what people try to pepper me with in terms of Epstein now, which is that they throw out a bunch of disparate data points. They're saying, oh, don't you understand that where there's smoke, there's fire? Or that these dots can be connected, and even if it's just circumstantial evidence, right? It's reasonable for us to believe that Trump is actually sinisterly colluded with Vladimir Putin to get installed into office and is now doing his bidding and subverting the U.S. foreign policy apparatus for Russia. It was remarkably similar in terms of the pushback that I got, just taking on a different political sort of valence now. But basically, yeah, I mean, the idea was that Trump and Putin colluded to get him installed as president in the 2016 election, and in furtherance of this sinister plot for Trump to do the bidding of Putin as president and subvert American foreign policy. That was basically it. And there was just almost no evidence that was ever remotely credible that substantiated that allegation. But people would always just see, like, every day there'd be a new bombshell supposed revelation, like Donald Trump Jr. sent DMs to the WikiLeaks account, and therefore we can make this salacious inference that Trump is a pawn of Putin, right? And it never added up to anything. I mean, it really, like, epistemologically, it really was remarkably similar to how so many people interface with this Epstein story. So I guess that would be my summarization.
And what do you make of this?
Oh, and there's something that related in terms of, like, it was this espionage theory, right, which had a sexual blackmail component, or an alleged sexual blackmail component. Yeah, the P tape, exactly. So people thought, okay, circumstantially, of course, it's reasonable for us to conclude that there was a P tape of Donald Trump in a Moscow hotel in 2013 when he hosted the Miss Universe pageant there. And similarly with Epstein stuff, there must be this, like, archive of salacious sexual blackmail footage featuring, who knows, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, Donald Trump, I guess, although I guess the Trump supporters can't really reconcile that one. But anyway, like, the central tenets of it were remarkably analogous.
What do you make of the recent actions that the Trump administration has been taking on this front? Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel, and making a lot of, claiming that they're going to finally set the record straight and hold the people accountable who have perpetuated the Russia hoax and all that. What do you make of all that?
Well, I've long wanted more disclosure. I want disclosure of government records in virtually every circumstance. Like, at any given time, I have multiple pending FOIA requests with different agencies of the U.S. government, whether federally or state or local. So I'm in favor of maximum disclosure, and I had wanted more primary source material related to the origins of Russiagate. But I'll acknowledge I found it a little bit disenchanting or disconcerting, or I'm a little bit wary of how this stuff has now been framed recently, because it seems pretty plain to me that they're using it as a diversionary tactic, and they're mischaracterizing stuff. And they're claiming, like, Tulsi Gabbard was going around claiming that Obama committed treason or something. I mean, spurious claims of treason were what were leveled against Trump that I was disputing years ago. But now they just want to repurpose it and, like, do the inverse. And I think it's sort of foolish. I was somebody who was very sympathetic at one point to Tulsi Gabbard. I knew her personally, covered her very closely. And she's basically become more or less a stooge of Donald Trump, which is pretty unfortunate from my perspective. It crossed the point of no return for me when she had her Colin Powell moment before the Iran bombing and decided basically to use Israeli intelligence to supplant American intelligence and fashion some kind of convoluted rationale for Trump bombing Iran. That I don't think is recoverable in terms of assuming any credibility that she has.
You gotta be careful. Michael JJ is a huge Israeli simp, and so he's secretly grinding his teeth when you say that Tulsi Gabbard was using Israeli intelligence.
She was. She admitted it.
Right. All right. Well, JJ, unless you have any final points to cover or closing statements.
No, I appreciate you being generous with your time, Michael. I think it was an enlightening conversation, and I think I hope that the viewers appreciate it, because and like I said, this is a new thing for us.
I'm sure 99% of your commenters will be violently and bitterly opposed to me. So
actually, no. Most of my a good chunk of my viewer base are largely like the Destiny type fans who think it's nonsense as well. So,
do they? I haven't heard Destiny talk about this issue.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's very anti anything that reeks of conspiracy, although he was pro Russiagate, as you know. So
he's not saying, like, Donald Trump is covering up the Epstein files or whatever.
No, I don't think so. It's the opposite, I believe. But anyway, yeah, thank you for coming on. Again, apologies for maybe the miscommunication up front in terms of I should have led with I'm not asking you these questions as gotchas. It is a genuine. I
No,
saw the debate
I
between you
didn't
and
take
Sagar.
them as gotchas. I didn't take them as
Okay.
gotchas. I was just trying to, was just probing and things.
Yes, I'm very much.
I didn't take any offense to it.
I
at all.
do mean I am on the more schizo end, and JJ's more on the autist end. If schizo likes to jump around and collect the whole thing.
Okay. I didn't realize there was a schizo versus autist spectrum here. That
in
would
fact,
Michael, you must get on.
In fact, I'm flying to Toronto in a month to do the second edition of Autismophrenia. Potentially, we'll see.
Of what?
Separate thing.
The new hot spectrum, Michael. You have to get on the trail.
Okay, I'm not aware of this. Do I even dare to dive into it?
Maybe the new dichotomy to subsume all other dichotomies. My last question, Michael. Would you be willing or interested in discussing this issue directly with someone like a Ryan Dawson or a Whitney Webb or a Daryl Cooper?
I have discussed it with Ryan Dawson on a Twitter space or an X space. For some period of time, he left prematurely. He said he was busy with his kids or wife or something, which was fine. But yeah, I'm willing to do it. I've repeatedly invited Whitney Webb to discuss with me. I wrote several articles about her. She admitted that she made quote mistakes when she basically went on a podcast and invented this whole false premise that Donald Trump may or may not have had somebody murdered in prison to cover up his complicity in a child sex trafficking operation. She admitted that she made a quote mistake because although she's presented as this like incredibly meticulous researcher, she just makes stuff up, provably. That she partially admitted to it. But I've offered to engage with her in any format that she wants, whether it's a stream, whether it's a video, whether it's audio only, whether it's even a private conversation. And she's indicating that she's not interested. Daryl Cooper, I did send a message to a few weeks ago asking if he would want to participate and never got a response. So one thing there's been others who I've like made similar overtures to, and it's amazing. So many of these people who are like these purported, self-proclaimed or like widely believed to these Epstein experts, they run and hide when they're asked politely by me or anybody else to engage in like a substantive discussion. Why is that? I'll debate anybody, anytime, anywhere. I was like a 4-hour Twitter space where anybody who wanted can make any criticism they wanted of me. Like last week, I do a million streams like this whenever I'm invited. How is it that none of these Epstein experts can subject themselves to a modicum of critical interrogation about anything? You tell me.
To that point, that is the exact kind of epistemological mechanism that I think is valid. Even though the fact they don't debate you is not smoking evidence that they're wrong, it is odd that they're not willing to debate you. And so yeah, I would very much. In my opinion, the best source of getting to the truth is a good faith, moderated, actually fair debate.
I agree. That's a good way of getting to the truth, and none of them seem willing to do it.
Okay.
I will do my best to
Please do what I think.
Please do.
This is what I think. This is what's got to happen. Okay.
Go ahead, JJ.
We get Michael on Jubilee, and then all the podcasts.
Oh yeah.
Ruined him.
Sure.
And then that's how we.
Yeah. No.
That sounds exhausting, but maybe I'll have to. I'll take a stimulant or something.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway.
Thank you for coming on, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All
Michael.
right. Take
really
care.
Appreciate it. Have fun.